if you're on the out of the box ChatGPT account and you create a bunch of custom GPTs, make your context really narrow for the task you're doing. Don't try to like put everything into one GPT and try to get it to do everything. Welcome to another episode of the Tourism AI podcast, where we explore how AI is transforming the tourism and hospitality industry. Today, we're excited to be joined by Josh Houston, co-founder of Brandish, and my weekly co-host. And we're going to dive into the topic today of how businesses can prepare for AI from a data perspective. Josh and I have been talking about this a little bit in terms of our own business. So I'm really excited to dive into this topic because, to be honest with you, it's actually a topic I don't know much about, but Josh seems to have a lot of experience in, given the work he's been doing. So, Josh, thanks for agreeing to talk to me about this topic today. So maybe just at the highest level, why don't you kind of maybe start with just telling us a little bit about what you've been experiencing when businesses come to you and say, "Hey, we want to do some AI projects," and specifically around the data point perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to be here. And this is an interesting topic for, I think, anybody who's stepping into this journey because it's relevant to all of us. There's no skirting around data with your relationship to AI. So I think for me, this whole like idea started with a test I ran like a year or two ago with ChatGPT when it first came out. And I was asking the model, what do you need from us? Like, what do you want? Because it'll make up an answer, and I was interested to see what it said, and what it told me then, and it's said it in some version with every model that has come out since, is data. And it kind of explained itself the first time. It said, AI gets better, like generative AI especially gets better with more data and more context. And what it needs more than anything is knowledge about you, your business, your role, your industry, your position in the space, like all these things that if you ask a business leader, they should be able to tell you, like, yes, we are in this market, we serve this customer, we are, in comparison to our competitors in this position. It's like these are things that you might be able to if you're organized and you pay attention to these things, just rattle off. But I think from what we found talking to customers is they've actually not done the work to connect all these different things that mostly were relevant for marketing teams and branding, but then utilizing that across other areas of the business. And that's what's, I think, the most glaring thing when we talk to customers for the first time, when we go into their businesses and speak with their leadership, they don't necessarily understand why this is relevant to the AI conversation. But it is if AI wants data more than anything. And that's, not just AI's perspective, but that's like the performant use cases and solutions that we see it's leveraging a deep knowledge and understanding of the context of whatever situation is being handled.
So you mentioned the word context a couple times. So I want to just maybe pause there for a minute and talk about context windows, because just for people who don't know, different sort of what I call out of the box AI models have different sort of context windows, which means essentially there's a limit in the amount of data you can feed in and the amount of data it's going to spit out, essentially, right, at the highest level. So can you tell me a little bit about, I guess, one, I talked about out of the box AI. So sort of how does the data conversation sort of fit in context of out of the box AI, so AI that just any consumer can get by downloading off a website, versus different forms of or different ways of using AI? And does that change the context window? Does it allow you to use more data? Let's just kind of maybe pause there and explain that.
Yeah, so there's a few different angles to context, and when we're talking about like a language model and its ability to handle information, each model has a defined context window, which is just how much information it can navigate all at once. And if you're, if you're using just basic chat GPT, it's a powerful tool for utilizing kind of, I would say, focused amounts of data, like a file or a few files. And you can get pretty large in file size now. You're talking the general like baseline people we talk about with a model is like how well does it handle a 100-page document. And if you think about all the information that could be inside of a 100-page document, like if your brand uh, was summed up in one file, could you hand that to a chat GPT thread and it then be fully caught up to your business? And I think in most companies instances, like 100% that's the case. Like when you go into larger businesses like that have thousands of people and tons of different business lines and just a lot of things going on, the just out of the box, off the shelf ChatGPT, custom GPT's platform is really not designed to handle that type of context. But when we're talking about like GPT and me, which is like I just refer that to like my relationship to the chat I'm talking to. The data I need to organize is really all about who I am, what I do, what I'm trying to accomplish. And because we know that ChatGPT has been generally trained on like the internet, it's pretty good at a lot of things, but in terms of helping it help me the right way I need it, adding context is really relevant in terms of giving it information about how I like to write. What's my role in the project that we're working on? What is the project? What's the context? Why are we doing this? Because if you can hand over as much of that information in context as possible, in terms of thinking about technical context window and how well the retrieval is going to work with that data, that's probably not the right way to focus as an end user, but just being able to delegate the know-how of like the thing we're doing will unlock a whole new realm of like how helpful this GPT is to me and this
Yeah.
task.
Yeah.
Uh, so
Yeah.
there's
And
a
I think
go ahead.
I'll just maybe jump in there and just say, obviously, when we're talking about the smaller businesses, which is the majority of, tourism businesses, likely this out of the box chat GPT or Claude or whatever it is, Google Gemini tool will likely have plenty of context sort of window availability for almost anything you do. And I'll just say too that, when we're doing things like creating custom GPTs, I always tell people, each GPT you create, so custom GPT, just for everybody's benefit, is sort of inside of Chat GPT. You can kind of create almost like a mini version of the model that's trained on a very small and limited sort of amount of content to do a very specific task, right? Again, sort of
Yeah,
broadly speaking. And what I always tell people is, if you're on the out of the box Chat GPT account and you create a bunch of custom GPTs, make your context really narrow for the task you're doing. Don't try to like put everything into one GPT and try to get it to do everything. Sort of like, having small task specific GPTs with very specific context or data for that task will perform better than trying to put everything or squeeze everything into one thing, right? Is that fair?
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And when you think about the goal of like when OpenAI started, their whole goal, and it continues to be build AGI, general intelligence, which if that is defined as like one agent to rule them all that can handle all the context and make decisions and understand timeline and and where it fits in all of the things to deploy agents and sub agents and all these things, it's far more like overarching than where we are now. And that's why we break things down into smaller bits. That's why we have like we create very limited focused custom GPTs often for people because they don't need to have some crazy robust complex system that's bespoke. Like customizing these tools to your use case is actually fairly straightforward, and we don't have there's no gatekeeping because you can build your own custom GPTs with the custom GPT builder in OpenAI, and start to like hone it in on the thing that you're doing. Like we often, that's where we focus is like honing in this generally helpful model to do the thing that you're working on the way you need it done. Because it's kind of an exchange. Like we're going to use this tool to get something done, whether it's help me draft an email and I'm really pissed off at this person and I don't want to sound like I'm pissed off, right? Like if you've loaded in your writing style and created your own little editorial guideline, which is like that's a jargony term that we use in marketing and brand management to like ensure that the whole team writes the same way for the brand and is on brand and communicating in sync, right? But when you break it down on a personal level, it's like you have to start thinking about developing these little guidelines if you want to fully integrate and delegate things to tools like ChatGPT.
Yeah. Yeah. And just for, for people's benefit, one of the things that we do here at our agency is we create custom GPTs that are for our own personal brand. So kind of to what you said. So I have a GPT that has, my personal ideal customer profile, some language around how I like to speak, a little bit about my personality, even stuff about my astrological birth chart, and just sort of it really knows me really well in terms of who I am, my personality, my style. Some of the things I put in this like this rant about sort of the things I care about, and I just wrote a document and just sort of threw it
Yeah.
in there. So, and it writes really, really well, really consistently, really fast. I use it for anything I write anytime. So my go-to is always go to my personal brand GPT, write my email, and then put it into my email. That's how I work now, because because one, I'm dyslexic. So for me, it takes a long time to write well. I'm a good writer, but it just takes me a little more time. So I could just go and just sort of type out or even verbalize, through a voice agent, like the voice feature, what I'm thinking, and then it almost spits it out perfect every time. So it's awesome, right? And then from our client's perspective, we also have these custom GPTs that sort of, again, we've loaded up documents. And the other thing we do is we load up, examples of what a good output looks like, right? So,
Mhm.
for example, I have a client that I do government relations for and public relations, do a lot of media relations for them. And so, here's a press release that has everything that, here's a well-written press release, here's a well-written government document, here's a well-written, this, whatever. And then we feed it all that, and then it sort of, again, it spits it out almost perfect every single time, right? So I think this
Mhm.
is, from a very basic user perspective, an individual user perspective, there's a lot you could do, because I hear it all the time, like, oh, even actually we have a new PR guy, and he was like, every single thing that I write with ChatGPT says, in the age of AI or whatever, it's got some like phrase that it says every single time. He's like, can it not do that? And I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, you just need to instruct it not to do that, right? Create a custom GPT, tell it not to say that, right? So from an individual perspective, there's a lot you could do just to make the tool better and not do the things that people get annoyed about. And that's a lot of that is just sort of, again, giving it examples of what good looks like, telling it what not to do. So the other thing is, again, there's a section in Chat GPT called custom instructions, where you can sort of, kind of tell it about yourself and then tell it how you want it to respond, right? And so in there I write like, hey, when I'm writing a government letter, I want it to be around this long, this is the tone I want it to be. If I'm writing a blog post, this is the tone I want it to be. So again, this is sort of very, very, very basic and sort of rudimentary level sort of data. But even on a sort of individual out of the box model, you can sort of add some data and add some instructions to make the tool really awesome, right? But going beyond that now, talking about, you started with saying that a lot of businesses have, their marketing and their communications department sort of are the owners of this information or this data oftentimes. Tell me a little bit about going beyond that, right? Beyond sort of just the voice and sort of more, I guess, advanced data.
Right. So it's funny because advanced data in a pre-AI world was like all of the metadata that you could extrapolate from like interactions with apps and people using the tech and like things that you could then draw inference on to train, intelligent systems. Like AI has been around, but it's been in the background for a long, long time, right? And it hasn't had its like spotlight like it is now till the recent years. But when we say rich data now, what we kind of mean by that is the information that we haven't captured yet, that businesses haven't been incentivized to grab, or if they were, it was like really weird. Like to have every meeting recorded was like that's weird in a pre-AI world. Like right when not everybody's using generative AI to do all their work and work with them and partner and augment things, like documenting the in between of things outside of the traditional data landscape, or like those metadata pieces that would be like inferred based off of like user activity, was not relevant. But now that's what we're talking about right now, like creating a written, like a writing style, a personal brief, a job description brief that's not just like your job description. Like we'll just talk HR for a second. Like what business does HR have in knowing every single thing that a person does? In a 5 years ago world, like you need to know what the teams are doing so that you can like fit them into the right like org chart, responsibility, like chain of command. And then that helps the managers know what they're supposed to do and what they don't do. Like that was the level that like an HR department might focus on. Now HR should be really involved in knowing what things people are working on in terms of down to the tasks, down to the projects, down to like the initiatives, because that data is really valuable context if we're going to be integrating AI solutions. And so when you talk about tourism businesses, it's like, do you have all of the information that like does your front staff person have written down all the information they know about their role, their job, the things that they do in between when they're waiting on somebody? Like, if you don't have we call them SOPs, standard operating procedures in place. That all that is documentation to write down, here's how we do something. And traditionally, that was seen as like, well, you need that for training, and that's about it. But if you have someone who's good at training somebody, like in terms of mentorship, you don't need it all written down. You need to just go talk to that guy. So then someone gets hired, they get paired with that guy, they train for a few months. That guy hands his knowledge over to the new hire. The new hire then blooms and brings their own perspective and flair to things sometimes. But like the transfer of knowledge was relational, and in an AI world, that's not good enough.
Right.
Right? Like
Yeah.
if I have a phone agent team that's really, some of them are really good, some of them are really bad, and I want to help let's say they're salespeople or their customer service. Um, if the customer service agents half the time are doing a great job and half the time doing a bad job, how do you fix that? Well, you have to implement some level of training. And that means you have to define what success is like. And if you have this written down and they have a sales or a call script or a scorecard that they're supposed to look at while they're on the call to make sure that they're answering with somebody's name, asking for the name, making sure that they're using it throughout the conversation, making sure that they're, you know, just checking all these little boxes, like things we know, like our good call agents do, right? If you've defined that in writing, it's a lot easier for someone to adhere to it. But if you've defined it in writing and delegated that to an AI assistant, that's what it knows. That like when we build like voice agents, they only stick to the call script, which is kind of limiting in some cases because that may not be good enough to help somebody, but the idea is that they're now using that written guidance to facilitate the conversation. And versus as humans, we kind of are like, I feel like we're a little bit more like resistant to that sort of strict, rigid like structure of like,
Yeah.
when someone picks up the phone, there are some great call agents that just want to get to know them real quick. They just have like a, hey, how's it going? Is it sunny where you're at? They're just very personable. Hospitality is like, just in their bloodstream. And if you don't write that down, what is that like? Why do we do that? What makes it good? Like if there's no written anything, you can't hand that to AI. And so that's where we start to think about like rich data is taking the things that have set us apart as performant or have defined us as like, hey, when I do this, it's actually bad for the role and task and project that I'm working on. But if we haven't written that down in any way, shape, or form, how are we going to integrate with technology that could do that same thing consistently or
Yeah.
avoid that thing consistently, right? And so that's the conversation now is like filling in this massive gap of human relational information that's just not been documented in business yet.
Yeah, so it sounds to me like the starting point before you're even there, or maybe you could do both things at the same time, but the starting point sounds like some set of SOPs or standard operating procedures, or so like sort of like listing out all the how-tos and the to in every single job function. And then it sort of sounds like then, I don't want to say recording, but capturing conversations, capturing what's happening, and then you can, I mean, the other thing is sometimes I have a slide on one of my presentations where it's using AI as a sales manager, right? So for example, let's say you have a Zoom call and that Zoom call gets transcribed, and then you can sort of feed that into a custom GPT or a different, whatever tool you create and feed it against some kind of framework. So let's just talk about, I use the Sandler sales method. So,
Mm-hmm.
okay, here's the Sandler sales method. And then you can kind of have it almost score how the salesperson or the customer service agent does against that framework, and then produce automatic reports. And then, I mean, I think that I guess what we're talking about here is it's kind of an exciting time for HR, I think, because all of a sudden we're talking about really getting granular and understanding the nuts and bolts and sort of using really cool tools that are available that weren't available a few years ago to do some really cool stuff in terms of training, in terms of implementing SOPs, best practices, all those types of things. So I think that's pretty cool. In terms of the SOPs, I actually had a client that I probably should get back to on this at some point, but they came to me and said, could you use AI to help us create all of our SOPs? So is that actually a great starting point in terms of using an AI tool to help you get started on this journey, like using a chat GPT or a Claude or whatever it is?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really easy way to get involved. Like if you're not familiar with using any of those like chatbot tools, a really simple way to get involved in terms of using SOPs and building SOPs is asking the tool just in plain, you don't have to come up with some crazy prompt or anything. It's just asking it to help you create the SOP itself. around your way of doing this. It's not a good idea in my when you're talking to like just a general like LLM to ask it to create your SOP without giving it context because it's going to create some idealistic version of the thing with maybe like a bajillion steps that you don't do. And that's waste. That's a waste of time. It's a waste of your time. It's a waste of LLM credits, right? It's just not that's not the approach. You don't want it to just tell you what it should be. The important piece is that you accurately capture the way you currently do it. And then you start there without, and this is any sort of like if you're thinking about innovating the way you do it, you want to write it down so that you can figure out how to make it better. Don't think about on the first pass trying to like do it all at once. Like you don't have to make an optimized version of your documentation, and you shouldn't bring your ego to the table because if you want to write down like, okay, this is how I actually do it, it might be embarrassing and that's okay. Like we hear people say that when they're describing, like sometimes we do these deep dive sessions where we talk to people about their work and in the help and with the goal of helping identify opportunities. And we have to like consistently reassure it's like it's okay. Like we're not judging you based off of how you're currently doing this. Don't judge yourself based off of how you're doing this. Just tell us what you've done and how you do it. Because you do it for a reason, whether it was like I got trained this way, or you know what, this I've figured out over the years, this is the easiest way for me to manage it.
Maybe it's just this is the technology we have, and it's not the
Yeah,
ideal technology, but it's what we
right.
got, right?
We
Yeah,
have to use this tool because they said
yeah,
so, and here we are, right? Like, but writing it down is the first step. And I think the progression, if you don't want to go to ChatGPT to do that, that's fine. But I always say, like, start with your pen and paper, like, write down, like, I do this, then I do this, then I do this, then I do this. And then you have to type it into the computer. So you can skip that step if you just work on the computer. But a lot of people use notes. And like, I used to do this with sticky notes. I'd like fill up a wall of sticky notes and like, all right, here's all my steps. Here's all the things that I think about the steps because you want to fill in like the context. Like you don't just have like 10 steps and that's the end of it for an SOP. You have like, I do this, here's why I do it, here's how I do it, here's where I do it. And if you think about, taking it a step further, using like documenting the tools that you're using. I use Gmail to write my emails. Okay. Some people don't. Some people connect their Gmail to their Slack or their HubSpot and they send everything from there. So it's like you write down what you do, where you do it, how you do it, what the tool is, and you do that for each project, break your projects into tasks. Then you can look at like, okay, you've got all the tasks for a project, you've got all these projects that make up like say a program that you're in. And that typically, if that's not a program at like the team level, it's like you could document your full job and then look at your job description and be like, is what I'm doing accurate to what I'm, paid to do, right? And this is not a common thing in HR departments. Typically don't own this process unless there's like you've asked for a raise, so they do like an audit, like, hey, let's actually look at your jobs. And that's been true. That's been around for a while. But when it comes to, yeah, SOPs, go to AI, ask it to help you extract the information it needs to write a good SOP based off of your actual workflow, not just, hey, what's the best way to do my sales follow up?
right.
And create that SOP. Like you can ask it that, it'll give you ideas and that's probably helpful, but like that's not the thing you copy and paste into your your document and then say, "Yep, here's my process." Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about sort of, I guess, bad data or useless data or sort of unclean data. Because I would imagine there's a lot of that in organizations as well, or maybe inconsistent data. So, maybe the marketing department has a set of SOPs and they're very different from the sales department or whatever. And so is there a
Mhm.
job to do to sort of create some consistency across all of the SOPs and all of the data points to try to make it easier for the AI? Is that something that should be considered?
Yeah, I think first about the housekeeping component of like where you store your files, like in small organizations that don't have like robust IT departments, this is really common for people to have like either Google Workspace or the Microsoft Office 365 suite. And it's really common and it's on like a person by person basis for different people to like store their information completely separately. Like there's no guidance or governance over that. It's just some people work offline because they don't have the best internet at home. Some people like are really, really organized, but they have like a million folders and the folders are in this in crazy hierarchy. And it's like, if you looked at like that as a diagram, that'd be probably really, really fancy and cool to look at. But then it's like when someone else needs to go find something, can they actually get there? And so when we talk about like share drives and, just like one cohesive space, like do the department heads from like marketing and sales actually understand each other's data? Do they have places where they share unify like information that's like supposed to be between both teams? Is that something that's mandated, or is it something that's suggested, or is it just in your emails? Like these are the types of things that we start to like uncover when we go into someone's like data structures. Like half the time people aren't using even like documents that are in the cloud. Like if you work in Google Docs and your documents are up to date, then you don't have to worry about versioning. But if you work offline and you have last Tuesday's version on the offline that you've been working on, and I've been working in the file online, we're working on two different files now, and merging them back together is not always a smooth process and just creates more work. So that's another, there's like, housekeeping, and like, I feel like relatively since the COVID era, this has been like kind of more and more relevant with hybrid and remote working environments. But like, yeah, it's very common for people to not have considered where and how they store their information, like, or using different machines. Like I use a couple different computers for my work, and like the download folder is not shared between my two computers. So like I'll download a file when I'm off at a coffee shop, and then I'll come back to my desk, and then I'm like, where's that file? I know I downloaded it. And it's like, oh, it's actually in iCloud, fortunately, because I put it on the other computer, but I have to go like to that folder. And it's like these are the things that even in a small business can get really messy really quick. But when we talk about like giving that information to AI, if you want to create like a really robust, kind of vectorized store of everything, like you have to have some like good data like habits. Like
Yeah.
you can connect pretty powerful like AI tools. Like, you can connect ChatGPT to your Google account or to your OneDrive. So it's like even if you think out at the most basic level, like what's step one for people in this? It's getting your information to a cloud-based service so that you could even have a chance at using it with a tool that's like capable of reading those files and helping you think about stuff.
Yeah.
I think that's the
Yeah.
like step one.
I'll I'll jump in on that for a second and also probably mention naming conventions for files. So we're pretty strict at our company around, we have a very strict naming convention. Every file has a consistent naming convention. My wife, Christina, if you're not naming things right, you're in trouble. And that's probably a good thing because then it makes it really easy for the AIs to find everything, right?
Yeah.
And you could probably correct me if I'm wrong. If you have very good names, so for example, for us, I'll use Métis Crossing, one of our clients as an example. We always sort of, shorten it. So it's MC and then whatever the file is called, and then a date, and then a version, right?
Right.
And then, that way, super easy. I would imagine then if you have things named that way, then you can probably program the AI to sort of know that,
Mhm.
is sort of, MC equals Métis Crossing or whatever it
Yeah.
is. And then it really makes it probably easier for the tools to sort of navigate your file system. Is that fair?
Yeah, yeah, especially for the tools that sit on top of your file system and you don't have to like program it. It's just like a direct integration. Like naming conventions are everything. Another thing you can do if you have like relatively unstructured information like that, is creating little like one-page briefs at the front of the document that like you might have already passed through. Say you pass the document through and you have it finished, an AI tool just to quickly summarize what's in there and how to use it. And if you just paste that to the front of the file, and in addition to having a good naming convention, now all of a sudden it's like the index is there. Like it's indexed completely. And it's like, yes, the whole context of the file is already indexed, but like in terms of helping the AI have no confusion about which file to grab, that's a good way too that you can, and it's kind of abstract because that's like a weird way of thinking about like, I'm going to include a whole page worth of context about the information in this file. It's like you would do like an executive summary, right? Think about it as your like AI summary. That's like it's for the AI tool that's crawling through your data and trying to find the right pieces to pull back to a chat that somebody's having, right? That's a little bit more like prompt engineer focused, but like we've tested this and it does work. Like it's really weird when you open a file and you're like, oh, the first page is not even for me. Scroll past, move on, right?
Yeah,
But it's helpful.
it's interesting because even in some of the custom GPTs that I create, sometimes I'll put it. So I use the example of I have my astrological chart in my Peter's personal brand GPT, and I actually put some instructions at the top of that document that says, "Don't talk about this. Just
Yeah,
use this as context for
think
answering."
about
But
it.
I don't talk about astrology in anything. But I do talk about the Enneagram personality test. That's a personality test we sort of do internally. We give our clients,
Right.
we talk about it a lot. So when I put my Enneagram in there, I gave it instructions saying, feel free to, reference the Enneagram occasionally when, when it makes sense, whatever. So to your
Yeah.
point, it's like I've given instructions to the tool, even within a custom GPT, to sort of help it understand, oh, this data is here just for this purpose. This data is here for this purpose. Oh, I should use it this way. So again, I think this is just sort of, it's not intuitive, but within when you're loading documents into these custom GPTs, I mean, you can even create, I know you can even create prompt chains inside
Yeah.
the documents that you put in, and then you can really get advanced and fancy and do all
Yeah.
kinds of fun stuff, right? We're getting a little further ahead, but it can get pretty fun that way. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about something that fascinates me that I know nothing about, that you've mentioned a few times that I want to talk to you about. So I figured let's talk about it here, which is
Yeah.
data hives.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned this concept of a data hive. You've showed me your data hive. I want a data hive because it looks cool, but tell us all about it. Why do I want it? And how do I, sort of what do I need to think about as I'm thinking through this process?
Yeah, so I have this tool that I called Hive Mind, and my Hive Mind is a personal tool that I created to use for the deliverables that I owe to all my different colleagues, coworkers, employees, staff. Like I every time I go into a meeting, am doing either sales or project management or a consulting like advisory thing, and each one of those meetings has an outcome that's like I need to update the project manager, or I need to pass the information along to someone on the team, or I need to create a proposal and do a follow-up document, or I need to like write up a report or something of that nature, right? So the whole principle started when I started integrating AI calendar assistants into my work. So typically every time I hop into a Zoom meeting or a Google Meet, I have this assistant that kind of is my shadow that joins as well and records the call, transcribes the meeting, takes down summary, identifies action items, all these different things. And it just does that by sitting in the background, listening, right, and recording. Once I end a meeting, that tool can trigger basically once it's done with its work of preparing the transcript and the summary and all that stuff, that triggers an automation which takes that data and throws it into a table. Like you think I'd use Airtable, but think Google Sheet. There's a sheet, a row gets created, and all the information that that assistant gathered and that tool captures gets spit into this, yeah, just spreadsheet that I keep track of all the calls, which then triggers another automation to go back through and look at my conversation and grade me and my performance on the call based off of a criteria, like 7 or 8 criteria that I've set for like things that I'm trying to get better at or pay attention to. So then it scores my meeting, and now it's just sitting in this table as documentation. Well, depending on the type of meeting it is, I then have a number of automations that could happen next that I get to choose when I go review my meetings for the day. But to turn those, basically this rich data about all the conversations that were had into whatever deliverable I owe. So if it's like just passing information to the team, then it just sends it to Slack and the team gets it in Slack and it's like, oh, this was for this client. So it goes to that channel in Slack, sorts itself. And then, the information about the call is there, the recording maybe because they might need to just go look for themselves, right? What was said? What are we doing? If it's a sales thing, I have sales templates that then, press go and then it pulls on my sales template, updates that document, creates a draft, and then notifies me when it's ready. So you think about like what I'm doing is focusing on capturing all of my conversations in the meetings that I have in a way that allows me to then delegate what happens next in the administrative work that I should be doing, have to do, right? So it's really saving my ass from having to do all this extra administrative work, like sending Slack messages, relaying the information, sending a follow-up email. Hey, everybody, thanks for the call. Great chat. Here's what we talked about, summarizing. Here's what we're going to do on both sides, right? That's like, those are the basics of being like a professional. But this is supercharging that because it's like what used to take me, I used to go to a meeting, be the note taker, write down as much as possible, barely contribute to the meeting because I was just in the, on my pen and paper, then go type that up into an email for like 2 hours. And this is, depending on your organization, if you're a nonprofit, if you're a DMO, if you're a government organization, like meetings and meeting admin is huge. Like, board of director meetings, like it's huge level of admin. It's like, oh, who's the note taker? Who's motioning? We're not even going to get into like is that a good thing or a bad thing, but like there's admin, and the whole point of the hive mind is to alleviate and relieve some of this admin because the outcomes are kind of standardized. And that's something it didn't become clear till I realized like my job is the same. Like there are patterns to the work that I do, and in most knowledge work this is the case. People just don't realize it. The pattern is like I check emails and I have communication tasks. Like I have to send Slack messages and I have to reach out to like clients. I have to talk to people, internal, external, all around, right? That's one category of work. And then there's like I have to write stuff. I have to turn what I've talked about into deliverables in some way, shape, or form. So I started thinking about my work in terms of processes, systems, and patterns. And that's like a first step mentally that you need to start when you think about if you could delegate half of your work to an executive assistant, like if you just had a budget for a great executive assistant, what would you have them do for you? And if you could start it's like a mental exercise. If you start there and then work on, okay, so what are the like recurring things that I do every week? Don't think about day to day, because if you ask or if you think about your job every day, you're gonna always think like my days are always different. Like there's no 2 days that are the same because we're thinking in pattern and like, did I meet with the same people? Did I have the same conversation? Did I do the same email communication? Like there's very few jobs I think that fall into that category. But when you zoom out like a week or a month, it's like, okay, we all check email, we all go to meetings, we all write stuff, and we have to deliver stuff, and we have to make presentations, and we have to do reporting and data analysis. Like these are all like very standard things that like if you look at your job, you could put everything into these buckets. And then there's probably like, depending on your work culture, some other variables like how much water cooler time do you get? Do you get to just roam around the cube farm or not? Maybe maybe it's not, but there's pattern to the work we do. So the hive mind is designed to like acknowledge and like honor the patterns, but then equip me as someone I'm busy. I spend a lot of time in meetings. So this was a very practical way for me to then capture back some of that time and not feel like I'm drowning.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. So there's a report that came out, I want to say in May or something like that, and it was done with LinkedIn and Microsoft. And what I
Hmm.
really liked about the report was that because, they did some surveying, but Microsoft actually looked at sort of how people are using their computers in app versus non in app. And I don't remember if it was 60% in app or vice versa. It was like either 40% of your time is spent servicing others. So doing the meeting follow up, scheduling the thing, doing the, you know what I mean, doing the meeting
Hmm.
minutes, all the things, the admin, or if it was 60%. I can't remember which one was which. But anyways, the point
360,
is that
yeah.
we spent a lot of our time when what they called servicing others, right? And so
Mhm.
really it's admin. And I could tell you, again, as a dyslexic, it's like I hate doing that. Like that is like the bane of my existence. It
Yeah.
makes me not enjoy working because it's like I don't want to do that stuff, right? So this whole kind of data hive is interesting to me. Is it hard to set up? Is this a complicated thing? There's to me it seems also like, sorry, before you answer that, there's a need, and that overall when it comes to AI adoption and data, there's a need for a cultural shift
Mhm.
and a mindset shift. And so one, tell me, is it hard to set up? And two, tell me about that sort of mindset shift that we need to be going through individually and organizationally to get to where you are today when it
Right.
comes to.
So in terms of setting this up, I built mine with entirely no code. You could go if if you work with anybody who's a no code builder, if you have any vendors that do that, that's what our specialty. So I just did it for myself. But like this is something that like the average Joe, all you need to know is like how do you want to measure yourself? What are you connecting? What do you want to accomplish based off of like storing your files or storing all your like calls in a file, right? those are those are mindset things. I think technically it's not that complicated, right? It's connecting my meeting assistant tool to my database tool, which is like one automation, right? It takes a little bit of time to learn how to do that. Once you know how to do it, a couple hours. And then from there, I had to build a prompt chain to evaluate my work, which was, a few hours of determining what are the criteria I want to measure, how do I want to do that. That was all prompt engineering plus a little bit of automation. And then the more advanced stuff of like sending Slack messages, once again, no code, automation, click a button, create a message template, send it like that in here. So then it was like, yeah, another like five or so automations to figure out what routes at the end of the call when I push the button. Okay, this was a sales meeting, create proposal, or create project brief, or do a requirements document because this is a technical scope. Those sorts of different outputs, they all take various amounts of time. Those are a little bit more complicated and bespoke. And like in terms of hiring somebody to do it, that's stuff that takes a week. Just it takes a little bit of time. But the basics of getting your information just stored, I think is the most important thing people could be doing. Like most of the meetings that get saved in my hive mind, I don't do anything with. They're just there because I can come back to them in a year from now, and I'm tracking like how much time did I spend in the meeting, how much did that meeting cost me, who was I talking to. It's documenting the like relationship building components, the things that are like not necessarily connected to the deliverable are really valuable to me in 3 years from now. So it's more of a
So I'm gonna
long-term play in some
I'm gonna
regards.
pause you on that for just a second. So you can go back then and basically then talk to your data and say, geez, how much time had I spent talking to Peter? Like you can sort of
Yeah,
then ask it that type of questions in
right.
2024, how much time did I spend talking to Peter? Man, that guy's costing me a lot of money and time,
No,
right?
but it's like I legitimately, yeah, because it tags who's in the calls with me and it sorts and finds them and then tags them in a separate table. So I've done a little bit more like overbuilding to like make it a bit nerdier. But yeah, like and then this whole every meeting gets also creates a Google Doc that goes into my share drive, which is being utilized by an agent tool that I use. So I can then talk to any of my meetings right away within, I think it's like within like 24 hours they update. So it's like I can talk to any of my calls from the day automatically tomorrow, or I can refresh in the tool that I'm using and talk to them now. So what I've been working on to expand recently is like the daily roll up of like here's all the calls we did today, here's all the recordings, here's all the action items, and then just sending that to myself as like a diary. But yeah, then I have all this data that's quantified. I don't even have to look like in my table, it's already calculated how much time I'm spending in the calls, how much time I booked versus how much time I actually spent. Because I always run meetings long, and I realize I'm like, oh yeah, I'm consistently 40% higher. Like if I schedule an hour meeting, I'm going to an hour 20, and it's like shit. Like then I realize like if I feel stressed out or overwhelmed or I'm like, oh man, I don't have any time, I can just look back and I have like an actual log of the meetings, and then I can subtract that from my total work time and know how much time did I spend with other people? How much time did I spend working on my stuff? Did I do what I was supposed to do with my time?
That's amazing. Yeah. And then just sort of to take that idea a little bit further, obviously, as a leader, as an employer, then potentially I can create a data hive where I can now sort of track and monitor the work and the amount of time my employees spend on meetings. And one of the
Hmm.
things that we're going to get into another topic here right away, which is data privacy and all these other things. But before we get there, one of the things that obviously people hate doing, that we expect people to do, is sort of track your time, and obviously when it comes to doing actual work tasks that you got to do that manually. At least there's
Hmm.
tools that can help you, but in terms of the meeting time, I think that would be super valuable. From how much time do we spend to close a sale, or how many meetings has it taken, how long are those meetings, and what are the I would imagine you can probably pull up information like what are all of the objections that come up in our sales meetings consistently, or how are we handling those objections. So again, I think that it's an exciting time from HR, because if you are able to track all of this information, all this data, you can extract a lot from it, and then you can sort of adjust your strategies, your policies, everything you're doing to make it better, analyze your profitability, all that kind of stuff, right? Because I think there's just a lot of interesting data that we're probably not capturing.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's super interesting. Now I'm gonna switch gears because I know everybody's gonna be wondering about this. So data privacy, data security. Oh my God, you're tracking my every conversation. That's scary for people. So what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, a couple things. One, if you're working in a job, and this is going to be maybe my hot take because I personally am like I record everything I do, every message, everything is documented, every meeting, everything is recorded, everything I say and do in work, like cameras, 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 cameras. And so I operate with that assumption. And I think if you're an employee working for an employer, honestly, you should have that mindset. Like and not that it's the right thing for your employer to do that without asking you or telling you, but like the reality is most companies are tracking what you're up to. Um, so you have to take that as that is the status quo. That's not an AI thing. That has already been the case. So oversight is common. Um, I think there's a couple ways. If you're like optimistic, you can see this as a way to like, well, maybe all this data is helping. Maybe it's going to help you and your company like improve things. Like if you're on like a sales role and you're talking on the phone all the time and you have like transcripts going and your calls are getting scored, your performance is being evaluated based off of like not just like a hunch or any emotion, but like the reality of like, hey, you're supposed to ask their name every single time you talk on the phone, but you didn't do it 40% of the time this month. What's up? Like if I'm a salesperson trying to like win my commissions and I know what like the criteria are, like I kind of want that coaching. I do. If you don't, like I don't know, like like I don't know, my hot take would be like you're probably shitty at your job. Like is that like I don't it's maybe like it's a little bit of a sharp pointy approach because people are also like there's a real conversation to be had about compliance and privacy with like how like AI models and how they use your data and are they training and whatnot. But if you're working in the APIs, then you're working on the private. If you work in healthcare, finance, all that stuff, everything's getting redacted. The models have been trained to do that, and your implementation has been designed around that specific sensitive information you deal with. Even at a very basic level, like I can look at every single prompt that I create and create redaction rules. Like if you see a social security number in any number in this format, like a social security number or like a cell phone number or an email, like if I don't want that information there, I can just automatically like program it in to just like redact it to itself. So it's not even being processed. So there's like hygiene, right? That's like info security hygiene, which most people don't have to deal with on a like technical level, but on a practical level, it's like the same things that we've been dealing with this whole time. Like you probably shouldn't be giving your, social security over the phone to someone you don't know, right? Like it's these same sorts of things that you probably shouldn't be loading in all your customer data in a CSV file to ChatGPT. Like even if you have your like settings turned off to do that, that's bad hygiene because you're handling private sensitive information in the HR world is like PII, right? Like, so and the same way that like you shouldn't take someone's resume and just like throw it at ChatGPT and be like, is this person qualified? Like that's not a good thing to do in any sense because that's their private information, right? Like these are things that everybody should be aware of and cognizant of. So it's like from like that, like the hygiene level, yes, but from like a mindset perspective, I don't think like if you don't want to be recorded, you should probably work in the trades. Like your
Yeah,
knowledge
yeah,
job is not privacy oriented versus like if you work in the trades, like no, your boss isn't gonna come watch you cut down the 10 trees you're supposed to cut down that day,
yeah,
or like fix the roof, right? Like that's where you don't have a robot watching you right now.
yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah. It's
getting
an interesting conversation. I think we can have a whole podcast on
yeah,
sort of data and data privacy and data, all this stuff. But like reality is we don't have privacy, and when we're, you see this on your phone is, you have a conversation with somebody about X and all of a sudden you're getting ads about it, or right, all that kind of stuff. I mean, the internet's always listening, right? I mean,
yeah,
and so, and then especially in a work environment, I agree with you. But there is a culture piece to it, right? So we need to, if it's
definitely.
not our culture, we got to slowly get there culturally, and we need to help people understand why this is important. And to your point, of like, hey, you know what, we don't have enough staff to help you train you how to be a better sales rep, but here's a method that we can, deploy that can actually give you feedback instantly. We can kind of track everything on a scorecard. We can sort of work, then all of a sudden I'm a sales manager and we're meeting every 2 weeks to review your statistics and your data. And we can have conversations about that are meaningful as opposed to just some, random conversation. How's it going? How you feeling? Right. So I
Right.
think there's a lot of benefit to it. And there's a lot of culture change, culture shift that needs to happen to get people's sort of mind in the right place about this. And so, it's interesting because we're having a conversation about data, but I feel like half of our conversation was about HR and cultural practices, which,
Yeah.
interestingly, I'm going to a conference on speaking on Monday where well, literally my conclusion is we need to work on our culture.
Yeah.
And so this is very aligned with that because I think it's critically important. So no, awesome. I think we could probably have another whole podcast on this topic, but I think that's probably enough for people's heads today. So Josh, I really appreciate all the insights. I look forward to setting up our data hive. And I guess I'll just say too, is obviously when you set up that data hive, you then also have to create new SOPs around how to use that data hive and how to sort of get the most out of it. And so there's a whole SOP component to that, because it's not like you could just set it up and then it's done.
Right.
Because now you have some different processes and steps to do to actually get the most out of that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. And we'll talk again next week.
Thanks for joining Peter and Josh on another episode of the Tourism AI podcast, where they dive into the AI tools they're building to help tourism operators and DMOs perform, as well as other relevant updates for the tourism industry. Stay up to date between episodes at tourismainetwork.com or on socials at Tourism AI Network.